Good morning. It's great to see familiar faces. Thank you for coming out this morning. Yes, in the fog. I was thinking as I was driving here, of course there's fog this morning because that's how John Paul operates in my mind. There's fog. But by the time we get to, 11 o'clock, there'll be a clearing and the sun will come out, right? So I'm really excited for this journey. For those of you who don't know me, this is my third year of participating in these theology days. It's a true honor. Part of the reason why I haven't done it before is because I primarily spend my time at the undergraduate level here. And actually, I just took a new position. I'm the director of the first year experience. So I'm now in an administrative role, and wow, you learn a lot when you go into administration. So I can't really hide in my office anymore and pretend that I'm researching or doing things. Now I have to go to these big important meetings and look at the presidents and report to them. So pray for me in that endeavor as I learn how to do that. A little bit about myself. For those of you who also don't know me, I talk fast, and that's because I'm East Coast and I'm from Boston. I am 100% Irish Catholic. With all that comes a lot of flaws, right? But you'll accept me and embrace me, I hope. And I have 3 children. Sarah is now 11, Catherine is 10, James is 8, and we have successfully made it through Maple Grove basketball tryouts. It's been a long week. Waiting for teams to get posted, and lessons learned with that. And none of this is possible without my other half, Ben, who, over these past couple of years, I've made a lot of jokes about Ben, but really he is my other half, and he's my solid foundation that allows me to come and have all this fun that I have on a daily basis, being able to be here. A little bit about why I went this route for this year. 2 years ago, when I had my first Theology Day presentation, we joked because Grace said to me, why don't you tackle the topic of divorce and annulment? I looked at Grace and said, really? Like, could you give me any more of a Debbie Downer topic as my first one? But I actually loved it. Right? So we tackled divorce and annulment, and I think I started to hint at John Paul II's pontificate. Then I went last year and did 50 years on the family, and a lot of that had to do with anniversaries and just looking back, right, and really wanting to fill in some gaps from divorce and annulment from that presentation. Then I said to Grace, what I really want to do with this group is I want to look at the moral vision of John Paul II. And if you know me by now, I think you know my favorite color is gray. It's not black and white. And that's because I want to take you on a journey of why this person remains at the top of my bucket list for when I die. I want to meet this person. I have grand visions of John Paul and I sitting down on a daily basis, having conversations when I finally get to meet him. I hope that's not anytime soon, but you know, right? I have always been intrigued with him as a person, because everybody has a story, right? So as a person, I'm intrigued with him. Certainly as a philosopher and theologian, I'm intrigued by him because as I would read his work in graduate school, I would have lots of underlining, lots of questions, lots of, did he just say this? What does he mean by this? I need a conversation with him. And while he really wasn't my pope per se, right, because he starts his pontificate, and I'm a baby, right? I just remain intrigued by this person. I heavily disagree with him, but I think he likes it, right? Hopefully he likes it, right? So I'm going to take you on a journey. Now, here's the problem. he had a long pontificate, right? And so what I did is I took and dumped into this PowerPoint for you this course that I teach called The Moral Vision of John Paul II. Because in some ways, we talk about John Paul II, and lots of times his teachings on the hot button issues, like contraception, like abortion, like the sexuality questions, like the divorce questions, kind of like everything that has to do with like marriage and family, that gets all the attention. But what I really tried to do with my students is I said, listen, you got to go all the way back to his first writing, Redemptor Hominis, and you need to understand how this person envisions the human person. And then from there, you need to jump to how this person envisions the world of work and what that might mean. And then scattered throughout, you're going to get all these other teachings. So that's the journey I'm taking you on this morning. In particular, I'm going to start with a brief biological and what I'm going to call a theological overview. And again, you know, this should really be done in installments, right? This should have been like part 1, the first 10 years, part 2, the next 10 years, part 3, the end, right? But I'm going to cram it all in there for you as best I can. So we're going to do that biographical and theological overview. And I'm going to lay the foundation by having you understand how he envisions the human person. Your world's going to get rocked. It's going to make you think, what could be different in our world? It's also going to challenge you. I suspect some of you in this room are going to say, no, I disagree with that, right? The irony is I'm talking about a man who, frankly, does not want me here with you. Where does he want me? He wants me in the home. He absolutely values motherhood and what that role means. But the tension is that while he's valuing motherhood, he's going to proclaim that I have equal dignity with men. How do you wrap that all together, right? I do believe he likes what I'm doing up here, right? But he wants a different world than how we currently have it set up, right? He wants Ben to have access to things to support me, and he wants my role as a mother to be pristine and valued. That's a lot we could discuss there, right? And then we're going to get into if he has this vision for me and for you. He thinks that the way you're going to approach your vocation and your calling and your work should look different. And that's going to spill over into what he's going to say about the socioeconomic order. And this is where, again, it could be a whole other session on, is John Paul in favor of communism? Is John Paul in favor of Marxism? What is John Paul in favor of? That was the big question in the 1980s. Why we would be talking about that, we would also be talking about the direct role he played in bringing down the Berlin Wall and what that meant, right? So you can see why that could be its own topic in and of itself. And then, of course, you know, I can't do these presentations without talking about sex, right? So, I mean, we got to throw that in there, right? And so I'm going to do two things in that part. I'm going to show you more in depth his letter to families in 1981. It is profound, it's visionary, and it's controversial. And I think to myself, what was I doing in 1981? I know what you were doing, right? What were you doing in 1981? I was just trying to, be an 8-year-old? I don't know. So you're going to have to chime in here. At the same time, I want to give you a glimpse into theology of the body. These 129 radio addresses that have gained momentum, even though they were radio addresses that were completed between 1979 and 1984, right? Why are people attracted to this, right? Why are people not attracted to this, right? Again, the tension, loving the color gray, right? And then I'll end with a concluding reflection, okay? All along the way, I welcome your questions. Sometimes I might have to say, nah, yeah, we can't talk about that. Like, that's just too deep of a hole to go into. But your questions, I'll look, and like all my students, I know when you start to fade. In other words, I know when you need a break. If you need a break sooner, then I'm willing to give it to you. Just tell me, right? So, you ready for this? Okay, let's do this part 1 together. Okay. What I want to do is I'm going to show you 2 trailers, right? 2 trailers. This is the Witness to Hope DVD, right? It's accessible in many different realms, but this Witness to Hope DVD comes out in 2013, and it's part of George Weigel's project and part of his book called Witness to Hope. So one of the most prolific scholars on John Paul II is George Weigel. He runs the John Paul II Institute, and so I'm just going to show you this quick trailer of, I think, this fascinating movie that you could have a date night with, believe it or not, right? So make some popcorn and watch it eventually. So bear with me here. And I unfortunately can't find a copy of the trailer without the Polish words, so bear with me.
Friday, September 1st, 1939, 6 a.m. A university student assists at morning mass in Krakow's Wawel Cathedral. Poland has suffered invasions before, but the nightmare to come lies beyond the imagining of all who have worshipped here for centuries. The student's thoughts turn toward his ailing father, alone at home. World War II has begun. Forged by the fires of war and the subsequent brutalities of the communist regime, that student, Karol Wojtyła, from Poland, becomes Pope John Paul II, one of the world's great defenders of religious freedom and human rights, preaching the power of the word over the power of the sword. He is a major catalyst in the non-violent collapse of communism. John Paul II has been seen by more people than any other human being. His appeal and charisma reach beyond the billion members of his flock. Yet this Pope remains one of the most controversial figures of our times. A revolutionary thinker rooted in ancient religious traditions, he is both revered and vilified. He is a man of many faces: poet, playwright, actor, philosopher, mystic, pastor. Above all, John Paul II describes himself as a witness to hope.
Okay, one more quick video to set the stage for us.
Karol Wojtyła, who became Pope John Paul II in 1978, was born in Wadowice, Poland on May 18, 1920. He made his first Holy Communion at 9 years old and was confirmed at 19. As a university student, Karl was also enrolled in a drama school. Unfortunately, his education was never completed, as Nazi occupation forced schools to close, and he was sent to work in a quarry until moved to a chemical factory to avoid deportation to Germany. By 1942, he heard his calling to enter the priesthood, but the war interfered. It was not until after the conclusion of World War II that Karl was able to return to school where he studied theology. Karl Wojtyla was ordained to the priesthood on November 1, 1946. He was then sent to Rome, where he finished his PhD studies in theology in 1948. He held doctorate degrees in both theology and philosophy. Wojtyla often engaged his pastoral ministry in France, Belgium, and Holland, until his graduation, when he returned to Poland and was named vicar of several parishes and chaplain for university students until 1951. Pope Pius XII appointed Wojtyla as auxiliary bishop of Krakow on July 4, 1958, and Paul VI made him Archbishop of Krakow on January 13, 1964, and later Cardinal on June 26, 1967. As a cardinal, Wojtyla took part in Vatican II, contributing to the writing of the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the modern world. He participated in all assemblies of the synods of bishops. Since the beginning of his pontificate, on November 16, 1978, Pope Paul II completed 95 pastoral visits outside Italy and 142 within. And during his time as Bishop of Rome, he visited 301 of the 334 parishes. After surviving 2 assassination attempts, one of which severely injured him, Pope John Paul II suffered health problems during his final years. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and his condition eventually led to troubled hearing and difficulty speaking more than a few sentences at a time. His health continued to rapidly decline until Saturday, April 2, 2005, when he spoke his final words in Polish, "Allow me to depart to the house of the Father." He fell into a coma 4 hours later and passed away. Following his death, many began to refer to him as John Paul the Great. Pope John Paul II was beatified on May 1, 2011 by Pope Benedict XVI and was canonized by Pope Francis on April 27, 2014. To learn more about St. John Paul the Great, visit Catholic.org.
Okay. What do I say? I have chills watching those 2 videos. I wonder deeply what you all think, because that was a blast from the past. Can you begin to see why he's at the top of my bucket list? Tell me about your childhood in Poland. Tell me about the death of your mother. Tell me what it was like to have your university training cut short and sent to a concentration camp to avoid being killed. Tell me what it was like growing up under a communist regime. Fill in the blanks for me. Help me understand. So much of this man's childhood is going to influence why he's going to say what he's going to say about particular matters. He's going to have a vision of the human person that absolutely has to be this solid foundation as he sees and witnesses firsthand humanity being wiped out in front of him and all around him. He has to have faith in something. And he will go on to claim Jesus Christ is that foundation that you must cling to. being sent to the concentration camps and experiencing hard physical labor will make him think deeply about the true meaning of work and how that ties into the socioeconomic order. Because he sees a vision of work in the communist regime, he sees a vision of work in capitalism, he sees a vision of work in Marxist theory, and he thinks deeply, what should it mean if Jesus Christ is my foundation, right? And then the pieces that we struggle with most often in his writings are, if he's got this understanding that Jesus Christ reveals the human person in his or her truest self, what does that mean in the context of family, the social order, the common good? But to me, I owe him respect because of what he witnessed early on in his life, and that you can begin to piece the puzzle together because of what he saw. I feel the need to stand in deep respect to anyone that was around and alive and witnessed World War II happening. Because honestly, I would say to myself, why live? And he has a reason of why you should live, right? So we've got some key dates. What else? Again, he's got this vision of this human person who is housed within a family, who has been called and has a vocation and has to figure out what that means for him or herself. And all the time, this person should be aiming towards the common good for all. Again, what is that going to look like on the ground for him? What else do we need to pay attention to? John Paul is going to spend a lot of time at Vatican II thinking about the notion of truth. And it seems weird I have truth written twice, but I'll get there in a second. If you think about what's at stake in Vatican II, early 1960s, the church is being asked to open her doors. The church is being asked to engage the world. Paul the 23rd, John Paul the 1st, who only lives like 7 weeks, right, is asking the church to be on the cutting edge of culture and history and to engage the world. John Paul asks himself, what does truth with a capital T mean? Are there such things as objective moral truths about the human person, while at the same time balancing the fact that we come from different cultural experiences and heritages? But are there some objective truths out there about the human person that we can name? John Paul is going to say yes, and we're going to get that yes because of his passionate belief of what Jesus Christ's incarnation does in the world. Christ's incarnation in the world reveals truth to humanity. Okay, here comes one of 10,000 buts today. But what does that look like? What does that look like on the ground? What does the sin of disobedience, meaning for John Paul, turning away from God, mean? The fall of Adam and Eve for John Paul II is all about turning away from God. I like that because it's not, hey, Eve, you really screwed up here. Thanks for eating the apple. FYI, there's no apple in Genesis. It's not a pineapple, it's not a coconut, it's not a watermelon. I don't know why the apple got the bad rap, but there's no apple in Genesis. And John Paul will stress, Genesis is about a turning away from God. That's what sin is. That's what the fall is. Frankly, the way we've warped what sin is, that's a good road to go down in my mind, right? And I'm going to mention truth again because there's here. Do you see that slide, what I have up there? One source of truth, Jesus Christ. Sources of truth. You should be saying to yourself, you have an error on that slide. What are you talking about? What are you doing? Well, by the time I get to the end of the slides in Redemptor Hominis, I'm going to put 2 quotes up in front of you, and your head's going to spin. How did he say these 2 things in this same encyclical? Well, there's one truth, and there's many sources of truth. Okay, just let your brain sit with that for a minute, right? In other words, this is a man with a deep, intense, Christological focus. Not an anthropological focus. The human doesn't come first. Christ comes first. What does that mean? The major threat out there that runs through John Paul's teachings and writings is he sees a threat of alienation. We are alienated from each other, our own selves, the world, the climate, the earth. And we are alienated from who? God. What do we need? Deep moral conversion. Now, deep moral conversion, not in the sense of control, not in the sense of you're bad, convert, but deep moral conversion to see our true selves. Our true selves made in the image of God. And what that could mean for us if we grabbed a hold of an understanding of our true, honest selves, right? So, what you're going to see going forward is the classic tension in John Paul's writings. And I'm only showing you 5, right? I mean, again, there's lots we could have read, lots we could see, right? His social encyclicals are revolutionary. People cling to them. Laborum exertions, on social concerns, centesimus annus, right? People are grasping at them, loving them. So revered. And at the same time, he is vilified by a long list of people, right? Because matters of faith become matters of life and death for John Paul II. You choose a pathway of life or you choose a pathway of death and what that death might look like, right? How are you going to respond? And so lots of times when it comes to the matters of faith, it feels like a life or death issue, right? So you can begin to see there's going to be lots of tension going forward. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next section. My goal is to get through this foundation of Redemptor Hominis. How are we doing? Any quick questions? Any quick thoughts? It feels a little intense in here. Am I making it too intense? Are we okay? I feel like we need to laugh a little. Yes? Are we tracking good? Is it making sense? Yeah? Okay. All right, let's go to Redemptor Hominis, or, we can talk in English, Redeemer of Man, right? Let's stop the alarm bells going off inside of me of Redeemer of the human person. Do we have to say Redeemer of Man? What do you really mean? What's going on? And then I have to say to myself, Carrie Shane, take a back seat because it's March 4th, 1979. Do you even know what was going on? And the answer is no, right? Because I'm born in 74, right? But man, am I curious of what's going on, right? And let's do 1 minute of fun. What's going on in 1979? Fill me in. How you feeling in 1979? Go ahead.
I just finished college and disco was all about what's going on.
Okay, disco. I love it. What else is going on in 1979? Name all sorts of things. What are you doing in 1979? The hostage crisis. Absolutely. Who's president? Carter. Right. So, yes, the hostage crisis is taking place. What's happening around the world? What? Or oil shortage. What's happening in Latin and South America? What pot is being stirred? Liberation theology is cranking up, right? What are you all doing in 1979? You don't have to answer that kind of rhetorical question, right? Dating. Raising two little girls. I mean, the world's in a very interesting place. And who are we about to elect president? This is the only memory I have from 1980. Ronald Reagan, right? I mean, seriously, the only memory I have. I mean, I do remember him being named president and thinking, wow, that's a good-looking president, right? Did you say he was an actor? That makes sense, right? But, I mean, the Reagan economic error, the boom of the 1980s is about to unfold, right? I'm about to get a microwave in my house, right? Everything's about to change in the 1980s, right? And again, can you think about as I go through what I'm about to say, what's going to be building in the 1980s, right? In the sense of what's going to start happening with America and the Soviet Union. All I remember is get under the desks, the Russians are going to bomb us, right? We're going to have a nuclear war. Get under the desks. And so the 80s, the Cold War, right? And I mean, he is going to step into his pontificate from the country of Poland, right? It's been over 400 years. I mean, do you know how shocked they are in 1978 when an Italian doesn't come out the door? They're like, who's this dude? Who's this guy from Poland? What's his name? We can't even say it. How do you say it? I actually wanted to show you this YouTube video. Peter Jennings is reporting from Rome, and Peter Jennings is butchering his name. And I don't even know who the other correspondent is, but he tells Peter Jennings, that's not how you say it, right? And I was like, wow, that's really, nobody can even understand when he comes out and they try to say his name. And the world is in shock that a non-Italian pope has been chosen. And yet the way in which he first responds and he says, I am John Paul II, trying to remain in the footsteps of John Paul I, who's dead and gone in 7 weeks, right? I mean, everybody's on edge in 1978, right? Waiting. They see that smoke coming out of the Vatican, right? And he graciously steps out onto the balcony and he says, I'm going to speak in, and he fumbles. He says, your language. I mean, our language. And he is instantaneously beloved by people after he speaks his first words. And then he's going to travel and travel and travel. I mean, look at that quote. He visits 331 out of 334 churches, right? I mean, he is a man that's going to be on the move, right? And he's going to jump into that pontificate and he's going to fire off his first encyclical, Redeemer of Man, because he needs you to know where he's coming from. So here's what he's going to do. It's March 4th, it's 1979. And he is going to say there should be no disjointedness when the human person thinks about cultural, economic, religious, and political ideas. He's going to articulate what is going to be called an integral humanism. The human person must balance these 4 areas of his or her life. What does that mean? Well, first of all, he's going to start this document like he's going to start many documents and say, I stand in a long line of people before me. So he's going to talk about inheritance. He's going to talk about John Paul II. He's going to talk about Paul VI. And remember my little token when I was talking about Humanae Vitae? He's the mastermind behind Humanae Vitae because he hands Paul VI a book on the philosophical understanding of the human being, and he says to Paul VI, do not change the church's teaching on birth control. And Paul VI follows suit and is so heavily influenced by how John Paul II will come to understand the human person. Now, the good thing is he's going to say there is a deepening collegiality that the church has with itself and the world, right? And he sees this new surge of life coming forward. Now, just so you know, it would be super interesting to have a liberation theologian standing next to me because I'm not quite so sure they would be this positive at this point because a theological war is about to break out between John Paul II and the liberation theologians that are writing in Latin and South America, right? So what is he going to do in part 2 of this document? Well, I mean, he's going to lay the foundation, right? What is the mystery of redemption that's in front of us? Here's some things. The God of creation is the God of redemption. Therefore, Jesus has redeemed all of humankind. There's no exceptions, right? This is good stuff, right? No exception. Jesus Christ has redeemed all. That's a big step for the church to take. He's following in the footsteps of Vatican II. Throw the doors open and say everyone's redeemed, not just, you over here, you over here, you over here, right? It's a time of Advent, and the path forward is going to be solidarity. He is going to coin that term and coin that into a virtue and say we must work towards solidarity, and what does that mean? Part 3, he's going to talk about redeemed humanity's presence in the modern world. The church must go through the human person. The church must understand the human person as she seeks to evangelize. Again, you could be saying to yourself, the church doesn't understand the human person. I'm the human person and the church doesn't understand me. You can see it building, right? The tension. It's a time of progress, yet it's a time of threat. Another thing he's going to be responsible for, this notion that humans have basic fundamental rights. Now, if you think post-World War II, what do we create after World War II to deal with human rights? We create the UN, the League of Nations, and we try to begin to articulate for the first time that human beings, regardless of race, religion, sex, class, you name it, have basic fundamental rights. John Paul will seize on this notion. Makes sense coming out of communist Poland, right? Humans have rights that can never be trampled on. And the way towards unity is to embrace this notion of solidarity. What is the church's mission in all this? Well, it starts with the Eucharist. You get the food to become a new person, and you start to put the pieces together because you've gotten the right food, right? and you need to repent, and you need to convert. Now, wonderful in some aspects, still threatening and alienating in others. But this will be the Pope that makes a very important visit to where in Israel? Say it louder. The Wailing Wall. Right? He will do a lot to bridge the distance between Jewish and Christian relations. And he will try to bring together unity and think about the world and the human person. What else? Here's your two key quotes. On the one hand, true ecumenical activity means openness, drawing closer, availability for dialogue, a shared investigation of the truth in the full evangelical and Christian sense. Here comes the but. But in no way does it or can it mean giving up or in any way diminishing the treasures of divine truth that the church has constantly confessed and taught. A great example of tension. Dialogue, openness, one truth, all at the same time. Second important quote. It is a matter, as a contemporary philosopher has said, and as the council has stated, not so much of having more as of being more. This notion of having versus being will flow through his pontificate and flow through his writings. It's not about having things. It's about being a person made in the image of Christ. So again, what will that mean in the socio-economic, political, cultural order? So he puts this out there in 1979, and he's going to run with this idea. Let's stop and just hold these two in place. Okay, first of all, the first thing he's going to say to me is, you went way too fast through my first encyclical. You should have had them read it. It should have been part one of a series of installments. You didn't say this, this, and this. But let's do a temperature in the room, 50 minutes in. Let's share what you're thinking. What are you thinking about Redemptor Hominis? What are you thinking of what we've just put on the table? Go ahead, Pat.
There's a book out there, and I wanted you to have it here, and you do, and it's the first one that was written about Pope John. And what you're talking about, what means to me is he had experienced a phenomenal amount of humanity. Mm-hmm. And so, and he loved people. He loved going with couples and into the mountains and all that stuff, and nature. He cares. Yeah. And that was imprinted on his life. Yeah, from the beginning.
He lost his mother. Yep. And somehow he turned into an incredibly, deeply caring, empathetic person. Anybody else?
In that statement, true ecumenical activity, he also mentions the word dialogue. And this is very scaring to some people. So I when I read this, I see it, he was very diplomatic, simply saying that, we're not changing any doctrine, but we have to be more, use more dialogue, listen to everybody. And so, but my question now would be, I think it's very good that we look at his total experiences. I like that very much. But now you too have your experiences, and you are looking through your sunglasses and looking at him through his sunglasses. And so how do they blend together or don't blend together? My sunglasses are very different than a lot of the 14 priests that I live with. And I know that I have to check this out. How are we blending and how come we're not blending?
Yeah. Well, you know, the hard part is not going to be a radio address, right? It's going to be some podcast, right? Because podcasts are happening now, right? One more person. What is going through your mind right now?
Trying to understand as much as you can about the Pope. There's so much history, obviously, and you'd like to meet him personally. In 1998, I was standing in front of the Vatican about to shake his hand. That's what's coming to my mind. I had an opportunity to be there. And once again, what do you say to a Pope? Have you ever thought of that? What do you say if you have a conversation? It was a mess of people, so it wasn't like I could be just like this. It was barely trying to reach through. And I had thought about this for a long time, and all I could say is, God bless you, Holy Father, as I held his hand for 2 seconds. And he turned to me, and I absolutely will never forget it in my life, and he blessed me, just like that. It was me, just directed to me. But to try to understand, and there's so much about his life. God bless him, and God bless you for studying him.
Yeah. You can see he's at the top of my bucket list. I don't know when the conversation and dialogue is going to stop, right? But I read this quote and I think about my Muslim students on these 2 campuses. And I think about the crisis we're in of not having dialogue with each other today. And as I was typing up this quote from 1979, I thought, my God, like fly an airplane and make a banner, right, to get the dialogue going, because so much dialogue has ceased today. And as I think about the next presidential election, I'm scared, right? What does that all mean? And how do I help my students, my children? How do I understand in 2019 that it's not about having more, it's about being more? How do we raise families with that notion in a world that's speeding by with technology? And do you have the latest iPhone? You know, we've all had to succumb to the technology. What does it mean? Are we being more? Is the screen helping us with true connection to people? The answer is yes and no, right? It's gray again. And so what does it mean to leave behind having more and focus instead on being more in the political, social, economic, cultural order, right? Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more of this. Can I keep going? Can I do about 10, 15 more minutes and then we'll break? Okay. Laborum exertions. The labor of man. Boom. September 14th, 1981. 1981 is a busy year for him. He writes Laborum exertions and he writes Letter to Families, Familiaris Consortio. The man is constantly writing. How? I don't know, because if I could have written my dissertation this fast, this would have been great, right? And you know, by the way, you can access all of these. You just plug in the title and you can start reading. You might fall asleep, but you could start reading, right? And the sentences go on, and you're looking for the comma, you're looking for the period, and all you see is comma, 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 comma. It's like, put a period in there. The sentence is too long, right? So it's September 14th. You know, again, context is going to be huge here. Thinking about his childhood, understanding he went to a Polish concentration camp is going to be huge, and understanding why he's going to say what he's going to say. Here are some fun facts about the context. We're at the 90th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, the official start of the Catholic social teaching canon, right? Approaching new technological, political, and economic conditions that influence the world of work. I mean, can you imagine what he would say today? Crazy, right? You are going to see the influence of the Genesis story begin to really come full force in his writing, and that's something that is a major side note, but I want to say a few things about that. He's going to articulate this notion that through work, humans achieve dominion over the earth, but he is really going to clarify what he means by humans having dominion over the earth and what that should mean and look like. And the key question he's going to ask in this encyclical is, work for people or are people for work? Again, makes sense. He's laid a foundation for you of how you should understand the human person. And now he's going to launch you into the next realm. You go into the realm of work. And if you have the right understanding of the human person, you're going to understand that work is not for people. People are for work. So, here's a view from above if we flew over the encyclical with an airplane, right? He's going to say work is one way in which we express our humanity. And he's going to say the work can be human work, it can be intellectual work, and can be laborious work. Work has many dimensions, right? He's going to talk about work and capital. Okay, everybody's sitting there reading this going, what does he mean by capital? And everybody's going to be trying to figure it out. In short, he's going to say there's no conflict between work and profit capital, right? As it's depicted in liberalism and Marxism. I mean, oh boy, like he just said 2 words. He starts talking about liberalism, he starts talking about Marxism, and the whole entire world is like, who is this guy writing about this stuff? This is the guy that's the philosopher. This is the guy that knows his stuff when it comes to liberalism, Marxist theory, communist theory. He's studied it. And now he is going to tell you what he thinks about these theories. And the whole world is like, what is he doing? Go ahead.
What about socialism? Why wouldn't that be up there?
He's going to focus first more on Marxism. Socialism's going to come up in his Centesimus Annus that he's building. He's getting there, right? Ownership and right to private property. He is going to go back to Leo the 13th, back to Rerum Novarum, back to his experience of not having anything, and say private property needs to be rightly understood, right? He's going to talk about worker rights. He's going to talk about the family wage and the just wage. And he's going to talk about women and work. And again, that tension's going to come up. So we just flew above. Let's go down. First of all, he's going to give an assessment of how things look in 1981, right? It's a new situation today. He says there's automation, there's increased energy costs, there's pollution. There's a completely new, entirely different political scene than when Leo wrote 90 years earlier. So here's the thing. This is a pope that starts every encyclical by reading what signs? The signs of the times, right? So he's going to give an assessment of what's going on in 1981. And he is going to say the first intellectual concept that you need to grasp is this difference between the subjective dimension of work and the objective dimension. And what he's going to claim is that the subjective dimension, the subject, the human person, does the work. And because of that, that dimension of work always takes precedence over the objective reality, the work being done. Over and over again in this encyclical, he is going to say, I don't care what kind of work is being done. The first thing you remember is that it's a human person doing the work. And therefore, all of this is going to flow from there. Not, well, you're saving lives, so you get to do this. You're over here, and you get to do that, and you get paid this. Everywhere you look, a human person is doing the work. And think about the ways in which we have talked over the years, right? About why does this person get paid this much for their work? How do I answer the question when my kids say, why does he get paid $38 million to catch a ball? I'm like, I don't know, because I sure hell don't learn to catch a ball for $38 million, right? How do we begin to explain to our children that the world we've created says, you catch a ball, you get this. Oh, you teach kids? You get nothing, by the way, right? I mean, have you watched children come into the world and start to go, wow, this seems quite inadequate, quite unfair, right? Or try teaching college students who sit there and say, I'm not going to go and major in X, Y, and Z because you don't make anything, right? That a whole person's set of gifts and talents would be based on how much money you make. That's because the objective dimension has trumped the subjective dimension, and we have forgotten that, right? There's 3 spheres of work that need balancing. The personal realm and how work fits into the personal realm. The familial realm, the work can't interrupt the familial realm. Wow, that's pretty interesting if you're a dad and you're told to bring home the bacon your whole entire life and forget about your family because a true man brings home money and doesn't stay at home. Wow, I just said a lot there, sorry. Right? How do you reconcile that? Right? That image of what the successful man is supposed to do, the successful husband, right? And then the social realm. How does work and the work we do influence how we create a social order? Well, the social order, again, we've created is we pay athletes millions of dollars, right? Because we say that's valuable, right? And again, worker rights. It's here that he's going to begin to flesh out this notion of solidarity. He's going to say it's an attitude you must develop, it's a virtue you must practice, and it is a principle you must live by. And again, that's going to get messy. That could be a whole theology day in and of itself, right? I'm going to give you 2 responses to this encyclical. One from Patricia Lamoureux and one from Stanley Hauerwas. What Patricia Lamoureux really likes about this encyclical, and many theologians appreciate in this encyclical, is that, remember I talked about having versus being? This notion of being a human person created in God's image, comes before anything you do. Your worth as a human being is not because you do something. It's because you're a human person created in God's image. Therefore, one's calling and concern for the common good should be linked, that social aspect. You should have an understanding that what you do helps the common good, helps the social order flourish. And this notion is going to come forward that as human beings, we are responsible for our actions. And so this little kernel here, responsibility for our actions, is going to show up in a later encyclical, 10 years later, Centesimus Annus, the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. And he is going to scream from the top of his lungs, all economic decisions are moral decisions, because he is demanding you take responsibility for your actions. So if you're the CEO of a company, held accountable. If you're the low person on the totem pole at a company, held accountable. Both in the same way. You should be valued in the same way. But in Centesimus Annus, he will begin to pick at the capitalist order and pick at the ways in which the CEO rises to the top versus the pivotal worker at the bottom. And he will begin to pick at the way the socialist order will work. And everybody will be scrambling post-1991 saying, what does he mean? And tons of books will be written, because that's what theologians do. They write books, right? What did he say? I think he said this. No, I think he said this. And then here's the crazy thing. Magazines will be started. No, he says it this way. A conservative magazine. And then another whole magazine chain will form. No, he says it this way, right? The liberal magazine, right? And that's how we'll start to divide everything going forward, right? Why do we do that? Don't answer that question yet, right? Gospel of work. JP2 loves Genesis 2. Adam and Eve, no apple. If you're leaving here with anything, there's no apple, right? But loves the story of Adam and Eve, dumping into chapter 3, sin and fall, okay? But here's the thing. Lamoureux asks, how are you understanding this? How are you understanding how everything goes down here in Genesis 2? You seem to have a particular understanding in biblical interpretation of Genesis 2. I'll say more about that in a minute. Lamoureux is going to point out, but social sin and social structures, they exist, and we participate in them. And so what are we going to do? Because we do get trapped in structures that make it very difficult for us to work for the common good. We're all trapped. What does that mean? Who determines the right to work? Because you got a slight problem of how you're envisioning females. You say they have equal dignity, you say they should have a right to work, but you also say they belong in the home, being mothers. How are we going to work that out? So, what do we do with women in work? How do we address all of this? Okay, that was kind of like the nice reading of Laborum Exertions. Stanley Hauerwas, a very famous theologian at Duke University, is going to deliver a punch and say, come on. Now, what's positive? He loves the fact that for the first time the church begins to re-articulate a theory of a just wage, more concrete and more empirical than Leo did back in 1881. right? So the churches, John Paul is working towards a more concrete understanding of what a just family wage should mean. And he makes this proclamation. All economic questions are moral questions. You can't really feel the punch of this line, though, until 10 years later in Centesimus Annus, because he's talking about capitalism, and then he ends the paragraph with this line about all economic questions are moral questions. And, when you're reading a paragraph about capitalism and you end with this punch, the punch is just a lot more than where it's showing up in Laborum Exertions. But Hauerwas says there's a problem here there's several problems here that you're not addressing. Although, let's give the guy some credit. It's 1981. I'm giving him some leniency, right? Hauerwas says you don't talk about power. Well, to be honest with you, I would say to Hauerwas, nobody has talked about power yet. We don't do that till the late 1990s when we start to realize people have power and they wield it against other people. And so all this theory is going to come out in the late 90s about power and how power works in economics, social relationships, all that good stuff, right? And Hauerwas says, we just don't need another theory. We don't need another theory out there about work. I actually disagree with Hauerwas on this one. Because, what? Well, who's reading Rerum Novarum? Nobody, right? Who's really understanding Catholic social teaching? It's the best kept secret, right? You don't really hear about Rerum Novarum, and that was 1881. So, I like that we've got an update, right? He does not like that John Paul does not point out the fact that technology can be ambiguous. And wow. Think about that, given it's 2019. And the technical revolution that we've experienced, right? What Hauerwas is most ticked off about is that John Paul never says what I actually think he should have said. And that is, you know damn well that not all work is fulfilling. What you did in the concentration camp did not give you life. Breaking apart cement and rocks does not give a person life. Name it, say it, claim it. You know it to be true. Why didn't you say this in 1981? And Hauerwas will go on to say, work has been corrupted because we are sinful. We do the corrupting. We create the sinful structures that force people into certain pathways. Okay, now I'm going to do something. We're not going to talk about this. We create the structures of sin. We decide what work is fulfilling and unfulfilling. Now link that up with the conversation on immigration. Okay, right. But do you see where I'm going? Do you see why we need to go back in history and we can take some of this stuff and we can begin to make connections today about conversations we're having that are difficult? John Paul doesn't name the fact that there are forms of work that are sinful, that are destructive, that are not fulfilling. And for me, as I think about that, and I think about conversations on immigration, I'm just going to name something, okay? My 3 children are not going out into the field to pick crops. Right? That is a reality that I must own. And what does that mean? my 3 children have a very different future in front of them. That leads to conversations not just about immigration, but about skin color, race, ethnicity, and how we construct things. Very difficult conversations. I'm not trying to stand in front of you as like some know-it-all. I'm just a little peeny 45-year-old girl. But I mean, this is the stuff I think about. This is why I read him. What does it mean today? What do I tell my children? And what must I own in my privileged status? That my children will see a very different vision of work than children from immigrant families who did nothing to deserve their status in the world, right? Again, whole other conversation, but you can see why I start to think about these things, right? To me, I'm going to end with this and then we'll do a break. I continue to read Laborum Exertions for this reason. There's a vision of the self, the human person, and how important a person's calling and vocation can be in the world. Unfortunately, so much about a person's calling and vocation is dependent upon whether or not the world wants it. Because we have again put the objective dimension of work, the work being done, over and above the subjective dimension that humans work. And it's the human being doing work. So if you fast forward to a conversation about women in work, women would say, the work I do in the home is work, and it should be valued. And the work the husband does outside of the home is valuable work. The problem is that one is remunerated and one is not. And we continue to live in this tension where we devalue what happens in the home. And we put all our eggs in the corporate basket or the public, not the private. And we continue to live in this public-private divide. And I would say, fully knowledgeable, we're doing it. And John Paul II would say, yeah, what are you going to do about it? You should do something about it. You should fix this vision of work. Because it flows into all these other areas. Okay, so again, I'm hanging my head because he's now saying to me, Carrie Shane, you forgot about this, this, and this. Like, you didn't have them read the whole text. This should have been installment number 2. And I'm going to say to him, okay, give me a break. I was trying to show them some connections here to immigration, women in work, marriage and family. Like, give me a break. I had only 15 minutes to do it. I thought I did a pretty good job. And he's going to say, yeah, but you still need to go back and tell them this, this, and this. Okay, fair enough. All right, let's take a break. Let's come back at 10:30. Yes. Yeah, let me come over to you. Hold on. Go ahead.
I know somebody who works very closely with the homeless, of whom we have lots. And recently he found out about a couple of farms where they don't like to use chemicals. Yep. And he had 31 homeless people who went out to pick weeds, and they got a total of $2,000 among them all. And that, they were very happy to do that. And he has another farm that's going to be like that. So sometimes even that kind of work does give people a little dignity. It's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that's on our consciences, right? I mean, really, is our vision of the world thanks for the crumbs? I mean, these are hard moral questions, right? That are actually very relevant as we go towards 2020, right? And we think about a president that we want to lead us, right? Okay, I'm secretly doing something. I'm preparing you for 2020. I want you to be thinking about some things. I want you to leave here asking your candidates very important questions about the human person. What is their vision of the human person? What is their vision of work? And see, now you can say, well, John Paul II, blah, 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 right? And they'll be like, what are you doing? Remember what I always tell you. Who's the church? We are. Do you need a PhD in theology? No. Do you notice what I did different this time? I gave you the readings. Should I take attendance on who did them? I just wanted you to have a chance to access them. I wanted you to know you can do this. And you can go to the bathroom now. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. Okay, friends, I'm going to ask you to come back together. Your exam is in front of you. I mean, just kidding. All essay, write it out. No. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so last piece of the puzzle. And again, part 3, he's saying to me, Carrie Shane, you've really left us off at 1981. What about everything after 1981? And I will say, I know, there was a lot to do here. We weren't on a week-long retreat together, but here we are. We're going to do 2 things in this last part. Insights regarding family, love, and marriage. We're going to look at his 1981 letter to families called Familiaris Consortio. And I wanted to say something about theology of the body too, because in some ways it's falling into this same time frame, right? Even though I don't think it really gets the amount of attention that it's going to get come the late 1990s and even into today, right? But I really wanted you to get a glimpse of the beginning of his pontificate, right? In hopes that if you were intrigued enough to go past 1985, you would have this foundation in place to really begin to understand everything that he said right out of the gates, right? Within 3 short years. He's just writing and writing and writing and laying this foundation. So let's look at Familiaris Consortio and let's sort of look at an overall concept map of what's happening in not an encyclical. It's not an official encyclical. It's called an apostolic letter. Minor details, people, right? But even though it's not an encyclical letter, people would still say, well, you seem to be still holding our feet to the fire, even though it's an apostolic letter, right? So what he's going to do is he's going to start out by looking at the family today in 1981. He is going to outline for you, get ready, God's plan for the family. And then he's going to talk about the 4 tasks of the family. So again, I want you to think about what he's done right out of the gates. The human person. He's done work, and now he's addressing families, right? And he's laying his foundation to go forward, so to speak. So when he looks out in 1981, he sees some positives and he sees some drawbacks. In 1981, he sees people having more personal freedom. He will talk on and on and on about the fact that women have dignity. Women should be respected. Children should be educated. And of course, our favorite topic, responsible procreation, right? That is code for humanae vitae, right? Responsible procreation and what it means within the family, the common good, society, right? What are some drawbacks that he's seeing in the state of the family come 1981? A degradation of values. Divorce. Okay, I just poked somebody's button, right? Let's go back to the divorce and annulment, my first presentation, right? So he's seeing divorce and what that means. And here's what he becomes known for. This contraceptive mentality towards the world. He's talking about rising abortion rates, rising rates of sterilization, and just this anti-life mentality he sees developing. Again, think of where he's at. The pill comes out in 1960. It's 20 years later, and he is not a fan, right? He's not a fan because he sees a corrupt vision of freedom out there. A quest for human autonomy. A quest to be God. A separation forming between the human person and God. There's a difference for him in articulating a vision of religious freedom, right? If he's living in communist Poland, is he allowed to practice his religion? No. So he's a champion for religious freedom. He's a champion for the notion of freedom connected to truth. Truth with a capital T. And he's a champion of you understanding what true freedom means. You understand true freedom when you understand the human person. And you understand the human person because who do you understand? Jesus Christ, right? So it's all circling back, right? But I can't stress to you enough how interesting this phrase of contraceptive mentality is and what it will become over the next 20 years during his pontificate. Because a very deep divide will form between those who champion what he has to say and those who begin to vilify what he has to say. And yet, I do this presentation because I think the dialogue that has to happen, both internally and with each other, about, do we have a contraceptive mentality? Because we've placed having before being. There are connective webs forming between those notions. And so what I want to ask you to do is understand that this phrase, contraceptive mentality, is an anti-life mentality. And I don't want you to just dump it into the whole of, well, he's against birth control. It's larger in scope than that, right? At the same time, that does not mean that there isn't tension within that statement, right? And it doesn't mean the family is not experiencing tension and trying to figure out having versus being. And that husbands and wives aren't feeling tension in their marriages. And the human person isn't isn't without tension in his or herself as we march towards the 21st century. So all of this is swirling in a big context, right? Here we go. If you don't remember this from your premarital counseling, take some notes, right? Where's Ben? Right. God's plan for marriage and the family. Human sexuality. On the one hand, it's biological. It concerns the inner human person. A person's human sexuality must be an integral part of love. I love this piece when I'm talking about hookup culture, right? Like, it's not just about human sexuality. It has to be tied to love. Do you understand this thing called love? And it's the marriage context only, right? What is marriage? Marriage is this conjugal covenant, unique and exclusive to men and women. Keep breathing. The sacrament, it's a symbol of the relationship between Jesus and the church. It's indissoluble. Keep breathing. The conjugal act, that's code for the sexual act. But it sounds so good when you say the conjugal act, right? And tell me why I put act in big, bold letters. Because Humane Vitae says each and every act must be open to life, right? It's not this view, this spectrum view. It's the act. Hold your comments, right? Keep breathing. Requires total self-giving. Aims at unity, one heart and soul. Leads to responsible fertility. Breathe. It is a vision based on your understanding of Jesus Christ, who reveals to you the true nature of the human person. It is a vision based on the fact that you understand the difference between having versus being. It is a vision that is ideal, that calls you to something beyond yourself. It is a vision that asks you to understand true human freedom and not using another human being for your own selfish ends. It is a vision that asks you to confront sin. It is a vision we are meant to wrestle with. It is a vision I like to talk about because we come to the conversation table broken, with hurts, with our finitude, in need of God's grace, in need of redemption, in need of solidarity with each other, and asking each other the hard questions of, is what I'm doing possibly affecting you? And you, and you, and you, and you who I don't even know, right? So it is a vision that he is going to cling to, and this is probably going to be 90% of our conversation together. And we will go back and forth, him and I, over this vision, right? Because I am compelled by this. He wants me to be something more than what the world tells me I am. All I can say is, holy crap, right? Like, okay, right? This is why the guy's at the top of my list, surpassing my dad. I feel really guilty about that, but, right? but I mean, come on, the conjugal act, every single act. What do you mean by total self-giving? Is that even possible? Okay, I get you don't want me to divorce, but I sometimes want to kill Ben. Okay, you're right. I need God's grace. I need the sacrament. I need the Eucharist. I need to be in a community. I can't do this alone. But at the same time, I'm going to say to him, I've got way too many of your sheep in front of me that are hurt. They're in the church and they're hurt. What does it all mean? How do we fix this? How do we mend these fences that are broken? What do we do? Well, he says, Carrie Shane, there's 4 tasks of the family. Figure it out, right? Okay, I'll admit to you, the first question I'm going to have for him is, family or families? Is there one nuclear vision of the family? That's a whole other theology day. We did some of it, remember? Right? Is it the heterosexual nuclear family? Oh, dear God. Like worms are coming out of the cans, right? Like, right? As we learn about homosexuality, people, I haven't even talked to you about transgender, the transgender reality, right? I mean, don't ask me to do a theology day on that. I don't know if I'm ready, right? Okay, what is this family supposed to do? It is supposed to, first of all, form a community of persons, right? The family participates in society and shapes the common good. Educates children, passes on the knowledge and the foundation of the past, so on and so forth. Family's where it's at. It all begins in the family, right? Of course, some of you are going, what happens when your family's broken? Anybody have a broken family in here? People, you all should be raising your hands. I'm sorry, right? Like, okay, what do we do? Families are broken. His family was broken. And he still has this vision. The family's supposed to serve life. That means 50 bazillion things. What does it mean to serve life? Each family is called to figure out how they are serving life and the common good. Each family is called to figure out how they are not taking from the world, taking from the common good, so that people are left there with nothing. It's actually quite compelling if you ask yourself, how is your family serving life? Family's supposed to participate in the development of society. Again, the family shapes the social order. But a lot has happened historically, culturally, politically. And again, I ask this simple question. Families. Is there one model of family? And what does that mean if we say there's not just one model? And what do we rightly become scared of when we say there's families out there? Again, how do we grasp what happens internally in our families and how that leads to disjunction among us? And the family's supposed to share in the life and mission of the church. That's pretty much a given, right? Because your family's starting in the church with the sacrament of marriage. What's needed? Surprise, surprise. He's going to talk about moral conversion, right? It's 1981. What's needed? He's going to tell you what's needed. A proper view of the family, right? And complementarity between the spouses. This notion of complementarity of the spouses, the way in which a man and a woman complement each other, is just psychologically fascinating to think about. I mean, do you ever look at, okay, I'm going to show you how weird I am. Do you ever look at people and think, God, why are they together? I was just in a restaurant with Ben the other night, and I saw this older couple, and I thought, what is their story? Is anybody looking at Ben and I going, how did these two get together? And yet, at the same time I'm doing that, I drive home and Ben says, you're thinking about something. I said, well, I got this Theology Day coming up, and I got to talk about all this stuff. And I'm looking at your cousin and his partner. Is that a family? What's a family? The rights and role of women leads to a theology of work. A theology of work that is going to try to guarantee that she should be able to stay at home, keep breathing, stay at home, and that the work that is done in that home is absolutely essential to the family. And the work that is being done at that home, and he thinks rightly by her, should be valued, put at the top of the list, instead of stomped upon, demeaned. My question to him, it takes two to tango. He's important too. And he's still going to fire back at me. She's at the top. She gave birth. And everything should be circling around her. I wrestle with that because I don't want Ben to feel invalued in the whole process. So what does it mean? Married love, it's fully human, it's exclusive, and it's open to new life. Is your marriage prep coming back to you? Married love, fully human, exclusive, open to new life. We need to understand what responsible transmission of life means. We need to end the anti-life mentality. This is a direct hit against the 1960s, and you can do whatever you want. This is a direct assault on this notion that sex is your right. You don't get to do it whenever you want, however you want. You must understand the conjugal act. And you must understand where the conjugal act fits in this specific context and what it all means. But you can see this punch coming in 1981 and why it's coming, right? This is a direct assault on the 1960s and 1970s. I'm thinking disco, right? Right? Of just sexual liberation, right? He will paint a very different picture of what sexual liberation should truly mean. I'm going to throw something out there just to stir the pot because it's fun, right? What does this vision of the conjugal act mean for delivering a punch to the rape culture we continue to live in? There's a punch here, and it could end the rape culture if we wanted to end the rape culture. If we wanted to put a stop to pornography. If we wanted to end sexual assault. And this is something I'm not budging on. We have yet to declare that we want to end those things. That's a whole other conversation. I'll get to that in 1 second. Lisa Cahill's commentary on this letter to women. She's one of the most articulate, outspoken Catholic feminists. You've heard me use her before. She really likes this notion of the equality of women that's being put forward in 1981. But she's very concerned about the complementarity model, this male-female model. The interesting thing is, in 1995, he will write a letter to women. And Cahill will say, 3 good things happen by 1995 in the corpus of John Paul's writings. 1, women's work inside the home will be named vital by John Paul. Women's liberation, the fact that they can vote and participate in society as equal to men, will be praised. And again, he will uphold this notion of equal rights. And that should say for women. The hard part about all of this is the bottom line structure that John Paul II has when it comes to marriage and family. John Paul is still going to be a huge advocate for the celibacy of priests and no women priests, right? And Cahill is going to say, does marriage always have to be viewed as indissoluble? Is the permanent heterosexual union the only valid form on which to build a family? I don't know why I did that twice. Sorry about that. That's what we've been wrestling with for a good 20 years. Is that nuclear family form the only form? And wow, have we had fights over that conversation, right? And people have said things to each other, and they've parted ways in how they try to answer that question, right? Susan. Marriage, sorry, MG, marriage, yeah. Here's another commentary. Your problem, JP2, is that you have a biology is destiny view, which leads you to a highly romantic view of both the feminine and the masculine. She writes blatantly, JP2, man is your norm, woman is different, idealized, and physically and psychologically passive and receptive to men and the world. What about the father's role in the family? What about the sexism in the church and how it limits women? Now, she's delivering this punch because something we could also do and that we would need to do is you need to understand that John Paul is heavily indebted to von Balthasar, a theologian, and von Balthasar's view of things like creativity, receptivity, the human being. That is a whole grad school class. Again, how do we hold the tension in our midst? I told you it was going to start to get interesting, right? Okay. We're going to do this theology of the body, and then I want to take questions and engage you, right? Again, 129 short talks, radio addresses. 1979 through 1984. They're being held every Wednesday at his Wednesday audience, right? I mean, to be a fly on the wall. That's the second bucket list, to go and be a fly on the wall where these are taking place, right? How fun would that be? I know, I have weird bucket lists. It's all right. basically an overall biblical reflection on the meaning of human embodiment, human sexuality, right? He's going to go on and on and on and on, right? He's going to build a corpus, right? What's his thesis? The body makes visible what is invisible. The body is a sign of the divine mystery. The vocation to love is inscribed in our bodies. Okay, that's actually really beautiful. If we had this lens in how we would approach the human body, we would not have a rape culture. We would not have a college-aged hookup culture. We would not have pornography. We would not be abusing the body. We would understand that the body is showing us God. We would understand what that phrase means, made in the image of God. And therefore, our actions towards each other and towards the body could possibly be different. So, a view from above, if you had to fly over and do a quick view of theology of the body. Well, he talks about God's original plan, right? Made in God's image, the spousal meaning of the body. It's all about this self-gift, this total self-giving that happens in the conjugal act. He talks about, after he's laid this plan for you, the effects of sin in the world. And I'm only putting up a couple here, right? But the main idea is he's going to go on and on and on about all the ways in which we use someone else's body for our own ends. And he's going to talk about shame, the shame we feel towards our bodies. He's going to talk about lust. And not really in, like, I think the stereotypical way, but the lust and thwarted desires we have that seek control over the body and what that all might mean. And then he's going to talk about, I love this theology of the body in the bedroom, right? What does it mean? Well, he's going to lay it on the line and say there's a difference between real sex and contraceptive sex, right? All he's really doing here is reiterating Humanae Vitae, right? Real sex is directed to the true, good, and beautiful. And here's his punch that he's been delivering secretly starting in 1968 with Humanae Vitae, and now he's just making it public, right? In these radio addresses. Contraceptive sex falsifies the meaning of the body. This is a person who wants you to understand that if you don't want a human life coming from the conjugal act, you best not engage in the conjugal act. And if you want a human life coming from the conjugal act, then have at it. But if you don't, you better figure something out. Because sex isn't your right to impose on anyone else. And you are not to use another human being for your own sexual desires and pleasures. Okay, I say that, and I don't know about you, but my head is spinning of all the things we could talk about. I mean, that gets into gender roles. That gets into expectations. That gets into expectations about marriage and family. That gets into conversations about masculinity, toxic masculinity models. That just gets into a whole hell of a lot, right? I think some criticisms and some concerns, and then I'm going to open it up. So about 3 more minutes. When you talk about total self-giving, John Paul II, what about real human experience? We're clumsy. We're silly. Sex is messy. Sex is weird. Sometimes all the parts don't work. Okay, laugh a little, right? Like, I mean, there's one thing to talk about the conjugal act, there's another thing to try to do it, right? It's 2 human beings trying to do this, right? What he gets into the most trouble for is his biblical interpretation of Genesis and the way he uses scripture in general. He is so going to lift up this vision of complementarity between the spouses, family, marriage, coming out of Genesis 1 and 2. And biblical scholars are going to go bonkers over the fact that do you not realize Genesis 1 and 2 play a particular role in the Hebrew Bible and were actually tacked on much later in the corpus of the Hebrew Bible writings to serve a particular purpose. Why are you not understanding what biblical scholars understand about Genesis 1 and 2? Frankly, he's just going to say, because I've studied this, and this is the church's interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2 over the years. I didn't make this stuff up. This has been a long-standing interpretation that the Catholic Church has sort of put forward about Genesis 1 and 2. So there's tension there. Is it really all about self-control? Like, you've made this all about self-control. And is complete self-gift even possible? What is complete self-gift? What is total self-giving? So Luke Timothy Johnson, one example, a biblical scholar who goes nuts over the interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2. Here's a great quote from him. What's needed is a more generous appreciation of the way sexual energy pervades our interpersonal relations and creativity, including the life of prayer, and a fuller understanding of covenanted love as life-giving and sustaining, and multiple modes of parenting, community building, and world enhancement. That is a fancy way of Luke Timothy Johnson saying, you need to get real of what people are really doing. You need to understand the bedroom. You need to come into the bedroom and see what comes into the bedroom. Everything from the day, everything from the past. That man and that woman is wearing a backpack filled with experiences, filled with thoughts, filled with demons, filled with gifts. And they try to come together and participate in the conjugal act. And it is downright messy, psychologically, spiritually, sexually. And we try to put words to it, right? But this guy is most known for saying, no, if you just understood this, you would be happier. So Christopher West is a huge champion of theology of the body. And I love this quote because it kind of sounds like me, how I would talk. He says, brace yourself. If we take in what the Holy Father is saying in his theology of the body, we will never view ourselves, view others, view the church, the sacraments, grace, God, heaven, marriage, the celibate vocation. We will never view the world the same way again. I'm not that eloquent. I just say we could possibly end rape culture. We could end pornography. We could end sexual assault. He sounds a lot more eloquent. That's why his books are sold, and I don't write books. I just give talks, and you can't find me, right? Okay. Still at the top, will always be at the top. And I hope you're starting to see why. I only did 3 writings, really. I only got through the first 5 or 6 years of his pontificate. There's much more that we need to cover. There's much more that he will go on to say. I spent 3 whole years reading the same paragraph in Centesimus Annus, paragraph 32, trying to figure out what the man was saying so I could finish my dissertation. Because I felt like he was trying to say something to me in that paragraph about how Christians should approach the economic order. And for 3 years, this paragraph went with me everywhere I went because I just could not figure out what he wanted to say. And so I read it, what everybody thought he was saying, and then I would disagree with them and agree with them, and it was a lot of fun, right? But I ponder throughout my theological career, which is only in its infancy, having versus being, as I think about raising children. I think about the sacrament. I think about marriage and divorce. I think about annulment. I think about this conjugal act in the world we live in. All of his writings permeate my mind as I think about how I'm going to try to respond to the hot button controversial issue. I want to be the theologian that says gray, not black and white. And that really ticks people off around me because they want me to go black and white. I think he's okay with me being gray. I think he wants me up here. And he wants the whole entire structure that Ben and I participate in on a daily basis to look different. He doesn't want Ben and I succumbing to the having. Consumer culture. The kids got to have the latest and greatest. I find it interesting that my career here has taken a turn towards fighting sexual assault, helping young adults understand the value of a healthy personal relationship. And it's funny because I don't use John Paul's words, but I repeatedly look at my students and say, do you know you're worth being found? So that they can get into a healthy personal relationship. And it seems to become my mantra here. Do you know you're worth being found? And they look at me with blank faces. And I say it again and again and again. And it's because I need to help my students understand the human person first. And then I need to help my students here understand it's not about going and pursuing the major that's going to give you the most amount of money. It's pursuing a subject and an area of study that's going to make your heart leap out of your chest and want to have you give back to the world. And it's difficult when I have all kinds of students coming from all different types of families saying to me, my family is broken. What does that mean? Or, I don't love a girl. I love him, and I'm a him. Or my next greatest challenge that's in front of me is I am in a female body and I identify as male. Or I'm in a male body and I identify as female. What is my role as a theologian in conveying the dignity of the human person in those fraught conversations? That's why he's at the top of my bucket list. Help me read the signs of the times today. Speak to me. Dialogue with me. Disagree with me, argue with me. Let's have the conversation. Thank you. Let's talk. Thoughts, comments? Hold on. Can I scoot by here?
Thank you. I have two objections to the Pope. One is that he appointed, according to what I've read, very conservative bishops and cardinals. So the Catholic Church is carrying on his tradition. I'm not too sure that God spoke to him about birth control. Also, the abusive priests. He, according to what I've read, he did nothing to look at that issue. And according to the Australian study on truth and justice, celibacy, obligatory celibacy, attracts the wrong type of person sometimes, and they do act out. And that if most churches today have a married clergy and they have women as clergy, it's a much more human interaction. So I agree with some of the moral conclusions that he made, but not all.
Am I supposed to respond? Did you hear me kind of like nod? Yeah. Hi, welcome to the world. Welcome to Theology Day with Carrie Shane Davis Zimmerman, right? No, I'm leaning up against this pillar like, oh, dear God, hold me up. I got nothing. I am going to keep doing this, though. Because the dialogue's important, right? The dialogue is super important. And it doesn't mean we don't wrestle with everything you just laid in front of us, because I'm going to make a generalization. That's what your generation faced, right? And my generation just doesn't go to church. Right?
Well, a lot of things you're saying, what Pope is saying is very hard, but, nobody said that being Christian was easy. We have to be careful about that. But I think we have to, when you talk about gray, people are going to say, "Oh, she's a relativist," and I think we can't be that. I think it's always, for me, I've always looked at, the whole thing of contraception and that whole thing. Yeah, we have that's an ideal, and we got to struggle for that. It's always going to be gray. We're never going to be there. We're never going to arrive perfectly. But I don't think we ever stop struggling. I mean. I'm sorry, so never going to say, oh, it's okay to be this. No, it's not okay to be where you're at. You're supposed to keep growing. So that's kind of where I think always.
Right. I actually really appreciate you pointing out the relativist comment, because I have been accused of being a relativist. And that would basically be mean, oh, you think anybody can go do whatever they want. No, if you hear me talk to a student, when I say to a student, you are worth being found, that's because I have a vision of you that is very contrary to the world's vision and of what they've heard. So I believe there are objective truths out there about who the human person is. It gets messy, it gets gray when you start to flesh out what the actions would be flowing from those principles, right? And it goes back to dialogue. you know.
You talked about being, you know, versus having, and being will always be a struggle. I mean, being will always be this work and dialogue like this. So to me, that's just the way life is. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Other thoughts? Yeah. Tell me if I forget over there too, please.
Thank you. Talking about Pope John Paul II, I just had a couple reflections, and hopefully the next time you give a talk about him, you can include these beautiful ones. There's the thread of Mary, totus tuus, his beautiful motto. After he lost his family, Pope John Paul II went to a statue of Mary and said, "Now you be my mother," and that defined his ministry. And one thing that I am fascinated about in Pope John Paul II is a lot of the hidden aspects of his life prior to the October 1978 conclave. I've been reading a lot of Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I. I've been reading a lot of the pre-papacy biography of Karol Wojtyła. What led him to the papal conclave? What are some of the more hidden writings? And of course, these are all, I mean, you could give a theology day every month on all of these and never repeat the same one again. But these are the beautiful things that help shape, of course, the writings that we know of. To me, it's beautiful because he's the most feminist pope who ever lived up to that point. He identified not only with the greatest saint, Mary, he helped highlight Holy Mother Church, which we were supposed to see. He highlighted how the role of women is almost more dignified than men, because the first relationship every human being ever has in this world is with mom, not with dad. Who are the ones who spend the most time with babies? Moms. Dads just don't have that same connection, and that's not something that the world imposes, but that it's a gift from God that he welcomes and that humans can respond to. Some of the greatest things that women brag about in their lives, ask any woman her greatest accomplishments, motherhood's probably going to be on the top of that list, even if she was a CEO, even if she's ran for president. A lot of the greatest women in society today still highlight motherhood, even if they are a one-and-done mother. They still highlight motherhood as one of the most valuable aspects of their life. Pope John Paul II highlighted a lot of that. And he highlights through his work, and I saw this in your presentation, that through our submission to God's will, as there's that eternal tension between the will of the world and the will of God, when we surrender to God, when we find out we are loved, we achieve what our original parents, Adam and Eve, never could. We become like God, which is the full fruition of everything God intends for us and everything the world wants to deny us.
Thank you. Pre-becoming, I'm trying to keep track. Okay, hold on. I'm getting old here, so he just said a lot. You have to study the theologians he studied, right? I mean, he's got a PhD in philosophy. He's got a PhD in theology. He's well-versed. He's well-read, right? And you're absolutely right. What I would like you to do is go watch Witness to Hope. I mean, we could have just done a theology day on watching Witness to Hope, because George Weigel does a really good job of going back to this pivotal moment where he loses his mother and what that means. I don't think it clears up all the complexities, right? But you're absolutely right that up until this point, he is the most feminist pope we've had. And there is that tension, and I would say there still remains that tension in his corpus of writings. And he is lifting up motherhood. And, the funny thing is, when I started this job, it was all about trying to say that I was a professor. Like, who was I? And, I have fought so hard to get to this point, right? My 3 children have taught me a lot. I would give it all up in a heartbeat for them. So I actually, now when I introduce myself, I do stress I'm a mother first. I try to live my life saying that grades and recommendation, like all the stuff with my job, isn't as important as getting home and being with my children, right? So I have found myself shifting in how I identify myself, right? I walk the middle line, right? I'm going to do this presentation. I'm going to teach on this stuff. I think it's important, but I'm also going to point out the crevices, the valleys, the things we wrestle with. I think you're trying to get to me, right?
I didn't mind waiting because all the comments were just excellent. And I like when you started with importance with being versus having. And I feel fortunate. I went into the seminary before Vatican II, and then during the Vatican II, I finished here at St. John's, not really graduated, but had some good courses, and we were very optimistic in the 60s. Science was accomplishing a lot of things. We thought we could probably have heaven on earth. I still remember when I went down to the University of Minnesota, and there was a book there that we could have a lot of free time, enjoy life, and technology would do the work for us and so forth. And right now, I went back into farming, and I'm in a rural community, and there are so many people that are struggling, and that's how they were excited about Trump become president. And like they said, 2020 is something we got to pray for, that the right things, because I could not vote for him, but when he got elected, I told some of my friends, well, the Lord works in different ways. We're becoming educated to things that he made. But again, I really appreciated your presentation.
Thank you. Go ahead. Jump in.
I just wanted to say, as a person who has raised children and shared in all the tasks involved in bathing them so that I could go to work and come back and help raise those children, and she could go to work and come back and help raise those children. The most objectionable thing that I find in all of this is that it is devaluing men in order to glorify women. And from my point of view, that balance needs to be restructured. That men have a place in raising children in the home equal to women, and women have a place in the workplace equal to men.
Go ahead.
I just have a comment. I'm not in any way, shape, or form a very theologically studied person. However, I tend to read some odd things once in a while, and recently I finished reading a book about world religions. And the thing that struck me was in every single religion, the basic concept is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And when we distill all of these things that we're talking about, all the things that John Paul is trying to tell us, and everything else, that's really what it all comes back down to. If we keep that centermost in our mind and work from that premise, then the other things fall into place. Hard to do, but I just found it fascinating that all these religions, from Hindu to the Mayans to Jewish, Islam, all of them have that same basic tenet. Something to keep in mind when we talk about conflicts between the religions and whatnot. They were not all that different.
Let me go back up here. just so more people can see me. I want you to leave here remembering, like I've said every time when I've ended, you are the church. You are human beings. You are called to love your neighbor as yourself. You are called to be more, not have more. You are called to love. What does that mean in your life? What does that mean for you as a human being? What does that mean as you think through all the relationships that you're in with people? The people that are like-minded like you, and the people that get under your skin. What does the dialogue look like? Regardless of what he said, he wrote a lot and he dialogued. Not everybody liked it. Not everybody agreed. But he opened up conversations. How will you leave here today opening up both the easy conversations in your life and the ones you've been running from because they're hard, but they have to happen? And when you have those latter conversations, what will you say to the person? What will you say to the human being standing in front of you? What will be your parting words? I'm not telling you to give up. I'm not telling you to not have the controversial conversation. But when you leave that controversial conversation, what will the person remember about how you made them feel as a human being? That's the task in front of us as the church. And again, no offense. You don't need a theologian. You don't need a priest. You just need you. Willing to have the dialogue. Willing to engage the hard questions. Willing to be. I also need you to tell me what I'm talking about next, right? So, oh, that's a great book, by the way. If you haven't read Mitch Albom's The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, right? Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming back and for me to be able to see the familiar faces and get to know you again. And in your evaluation, please, tell me where I should go next. I'm a little bit out of ideas. I've come up with the past 3. Tell me what I should do, right? And I really look forward to seeing you again. Thanks for your time.